Hi, this video is to present another nonsense in constraint solving and degrees of freedom analysis that is present in Inventor. I have set up a very basic assembly just for this presentation, and we have no relationships now. We have grounded part and part free. So I will now apply the constraint between the center points of those two to take away all translation degrees of freedom from the second part. As we now see, Inventor indicates that this part has 3 rotational degrees of freedom, so it can rotate, and I cannot force it to rotate about its axis with a mouse, but it can rotate about its axis. So it can generally rotate about 3 axes around this point. So far everything is good. If we do the degrees of freedom analysis, we have the proper solution that the part 2, that is this one, has 3 rotational degrees of freedom, and we are presented those, so all is fine. Now what I will do, I will turn back on that. I will now apply a constraint between I will now apply the explicit reference vector angle constraint between this axis of the part. This is the main this is the origin axis of the part and the origin axis of the second part, and I will choose the reference vector as this axis of the part. So the idea is to force this this part 2 to be collinear with the, let's say, axis of the part 1, and so the 2 axes are facing the same direction, so to not be able to flip around. So if I theoretically, if I select the basically any axis, any line in space, if I choose 0 angle, this will theoretically force those 2 axis to be collinear or point in the same direction, but taking into account that this point is already constant, they should be collinear. So I will now select this. Inventor accepts this input for this constraint, and I specify the value of 0 degrees. I will now click OK. As we can see here now, the part is aligned with the axis as we would expect, but as we can see here, Inventor still indicates that this part has 3 rotational degrees of freedom. So this is obviously not true in terms of the part, because it can only rotate about its axis, because it has a center point constraint and a direction is given. So this together brings all degrees of freedom but this rotation. So it is not as in reality this part can move. So now if we do degree of freedom analysis, we see that this angle constraint that we have applied for Inventor, it has no meaning. Inventor doesn't see this constraint that we have applied, and basing on that we can assume that Inventor will, if it tries to force this part against this constraint, it will not see that, and it will not follow this constraint because it doesn't see it. So this is wrong. This is totally wrong, and this is only one of many problems. I will try to supply them one by one once I have time to do that. So this is wrong. This is not true. So that part doesn't have still 3 rotational degrees of freedom, but only one. It can only rotate about its axis.